Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs, starting to make some noise in the transfer portal, landing another commitment from former Miami Hurricane wide receiver Colbie Young. And this is a guy that, and you can ask a lot of Miami fans, and they'll tell you this, a guy that we've watched a lot the last 2 years. You're getting a good wide receiver right now in Colbie Young. You could be getting an elite wide receiver with all the traits and the tools that Colbie Young has. I think what's most exciting for Georgia fans about this edition is you might be getting an absolute stud who really is just a matchup nightmare. This is a guy that's 6'5", 220 pounds with really good long speed. So if you want to put a bigger, more physical defensive back on a guy like Colbie Young, he's going to run right by him. And if you want to put a smaller guy to keep up with the speed of Colbie Young, he's probably just going to kind of out physical him and have that use that frame against smaller defensive backs. At the end of the day, there are just not a lot of defensive backs in college football that can deal with the traits, the physical traits that Colbie Young brings to the table. And if you're a Georgia fan, I mean, you have to be extremely excited about how he's going to get used in this Georgia offense and what kind of player he develops to in Athens. Going to get into Colbie Young, kind of how he fits into this Georgia wide receiver room. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. There has been just a ton of support for us talking all these roster moves in the transfer portal. I love doing it. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys like you guys have. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Colbie Young. And two things that I love most about Colbie Young, and again, Miami Hurricane fans, they'll tell you this. This is a guy that 6 months ago, heading into this college football season, a ton of buzz around Colbie Young and being that true wide receiver one. And he had a phenomenal year, but a lot of Miami fans will tell you there's still a lot of meat left on the bone in terms of what Colbie Young can be at the college football level. Two things that he really excels at. One, contested catch. And I love that because when you get into the red zone, having a big target like Colbie Young who can make those combat catches is absolutely massive. And you're the Georgia Bulldogs. You're trying to win a national championship every single year. The margin is really small. And scoring touchdowns in the red zone versus kicking for 3 points is massive. And Colbie Young is going to allow an offense a little bit more easier to score some of those touchdowns. I mean, Colbie Young's a guy that there does not need to be a throwing window open for him to catch a touchdown because he can go right up over defensive backs, make plays, over 10 contested catches during that 2023 season with largely for the second half of that season, not very good quarterback play. And so for Colbie Young, part of the attraction to coming to Athens is and you have Carson Beck coming back. And that is one of the best, if not the best quarterback heading into that 2024 season. Colbie Young having that kind of quarterback play, a guy that can make any throw on the football field is going to be massive. And the second thing that I love about Colbie Young and something that just doesn't get talked enough about in terms of evaluating wide receivers, what can they do after the catch? And you look at Colbie Young's frame and say, well, is he that much of a threat after the catch? He is, and for a little bit different of a reason than some other wide receivers are. Colbie Young, not necessarily going to make people miss, but he is an absolute load to bring down. And you look at the numbers, I mean, 550 receiving yards on the year, 250 of those, almost half of them, came after the catch for Colbie Young. He's a forced missed tackle machine. He's a lot of defensive backs who are around that 6'1", 190, 200 pounds. They can't tackle Colbie Young. He's just too big. He's too physical. If you have some NFL draft fans out there, Drake London from a couple of years ago at USC, kind of that similar body where it's just a kind of a load for some of those smaller defensive backs to bring a guy like Colbie Young down. And he has that long speed. So you have to be, if you're a defensive back, you have to make sure you're taking the right angles on a guy like Colbie Young because he'll run right by you. He'll also run right through you. So the combination of the contested catches, what he can do in the red zone, and also hitting those explosive plays after the catch, Colbie Young's a guy that could be a massive asset to this Georgia wide receiver room in 2024. And you look at how that Georgia room is shaping up. Obviously, Brock Bowers presumably going to the NFL and just one of the generational tight ends that we've seen. Undecided on Ladd McConkey. You have a guy like Marcus Rosemy-Jackson who could come back. We're not really sure. I think there are some question marks in the wide receiver room and the depth that you'll have. I'm confident that this wide receiver room is going to be good. How deep is it going to be? There were maybe some question marks. So what does Kirby Smart and the staff do? They go out and get two of the premier wide receivers in college football that were available in the transfer portal: London Humphreys, who is an absolute burner, and then Colbie Young, who's just a physically imposing wide receiver. And I say this a lot. You kind of look at the wide receiver position as a basketball team in a lot of different ways, right? You want wide receivers who can do different kind of things, just like on a basketball team. And I'm not a huge basketball guy, but you want the center for some rebounds. You want the point guard to get the assists. You want the shooting guard to be able to make the open shots. You want to, in the similar way, in that wide receiver room, you want wide receivers who can do a lot of different things, right? You want your burners, your guys like Arian Smith. You want your big physical wide receivers, guys like Colbie Young. And I think Colbie Young fits right in to be that physical presence on the boundary for Georgia, and specifically in the red zone. Like when we're inside the 20, when we're inside the 10, and those throwing windows are a little bit smaller, Colbie Young's a guy that the throwing windows don't need to be big for Colbie Young to be catching touchdown passes. Massive asset for the Georgia Bulldogs in the red zone. And again, a guy that just has a super high ceiling. And you take a look at what Georgia's doing in the transfer portal, and we said this to start out. Like, Georgia's not going to be a program that takes 25 players in the transfer portal. They're just too good of a roster. There is not 25 guys available in the portal that can make this Georgia team better. What they're doing is targeting specific guys that can bring some value to this Georgia program. When you're competing for a national championship every year, you're looking for that 1%. What's a player that can add 1% value, make this team 1% better? A guy like Colbie Young is certainly one of those guys, because he can be an elite wide receiver on the boundary for Georgia. You have a guy like London Humphreys, who is one of the fastest players at the SEC level, running a 10.6 100-meter dash time. So you have some speed, you have some size. And then a guy that we didn't get the chance to talk about yesterday, Xavier McLeod, committing to the Georgia Bulldogs. And this is exactly what Georgia wants on the inside of that defensive line. We kind of were critical on, not critical, but kind of recognizing that Georgia on the inside is going to lose some guys to the NFL, and then largely maybe just lack some difference makers this year, like the last couple of years that we saw guys like Jalen Carter and guys like Jordan Davis. You have a guy like Xavier McLeod who has every single tool you want in the tool shed. And we've learned from this time that trust this Georgia staff, specifically Kirby Smart, in evaluating that defensive line and bringing guys in that are only not going to provide depth, but have that upside. And a guy like Xavier McLeod certainly has that, right? He's up to 6'5", 325 pounds. You tad him with Jamal Jarrett, with a guy like Jordan Hall. You're looking at that inside and the youth they have on the interior of that defensive line, and you're excited. And the last thing to mention with Xavier McLeod is depth. And many Georgia fans who have been listening for the last, 4 months, I kind of always say, what is Georgia special with on the inside of that defensive line? Yes, they have the guys like Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis. They also have a ton of depth, right? When Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis were those starting impact makers, they had guys like Warren Brinson or Nazir Stackhouse coming in the 2 and 3 deep. Those guys are going to be playing in the NFL in the next couple of years, if not next year. So you look at Georgia and what they try to do. They want to be deep. So when you're trying to win 15 straight games, you have a lot of depth to withstand injuries, but also through 4 quarters, you're rotating a ton of quality players on that defensive line. I think Xavier McLeod certainly adds that depth while also adding a high upside college football player on that inside of that defensive line. Last target that's kind of emerged for Georgia. And again, I don't think they're going to take more than 6-7 guys in the portal. Trevor Etienne. Many of you guys have already heard me talk about Trevor Etienne. I think he's a perfect fit in that Georgia offense, what he can do out of the backfield as a receiver, what he can do with a quality offensive line in front of him, which he didn't have for Florida the last 2 years. Trevor Etienne is going to be a difference maker. And again, one of those guys that's going to make Georgia 1% better. I would be very excited to see Trevor Etienne in Athens. Not sure when that's going to happen, but it sounds like it might. If you're Georgia, you're really happy about what they're doing in the transfer portal. You're obviously very happy about what they brought in that 2024 class. Make no mistake about it. Come that 2024 season, you're going to see Georgia at the top of the odds boards to win another national championship. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Colbie Young, massive upside receiver, going to make this Georgia offense better. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.